The SEC might finally be making a change that they should have made a long time ago. Does it mean they're about to, expand again?
You are Locked On College Football, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This is your number one source to stay up to date with the biggest stories in the greatest sport on planet Earth. Realignment, coaching carousel, the portal, and more. We've got it all here every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. You can get any winning $5 bet, and that turns into 150 in bonus bets. FanDuel.com/locked on. I've got Chris Gordy here of Locked On SEC joining me to start today's show. Here's where my head is at with this announcement, Chris, and this came courtesy of Texas Athletic Director Chris Conte. It has been talked about before. I think the move should have been made a long time ago, and that's the SEC going to a 9-game conference schedule. The reason realignment pops into my head is, are they looking at this potentially through a prism of, Florida State wants out of the ACC and there's an SEC school down in Florida already, that'd be Florida State. They already play every single year, and that would be kind of a natural transition. And we could make a league that is so good, we wouldn't need quality non-conference games. And if we have 9 league games, no one can fault us for shortchanging and trying to gimmick our way into the playoff there. Do you think this is a sign of a bigger move, or is this just a football move?
Well, this is a move that's been talked about for some time. This is more a math move, and let me explain. The last, whatever number of years in the SEC, what they've always done with 14 teams is you had the SEC East, you had the SEC West, and everybody played 2 crossovers, from the other side. One was a permanent rival, and the other one would be a rotator. The problem with that became, Alabama. One of their permanent opponents was Tennessee, and basically Tennessee went through a decade of suck where Alabama didn't really have to. They weren't challenged very much by Tennessee, and then the other one would rotate. And there were some years where Bama would get Tennessee, Vanderbilt in the East. LSU's permanent opponent has been Florida for years. And Florida, I know they haven't been great lately, but for years under Urban Meyer, I mean, they were always a top 25 caliber team. And there were years where LSU would get Florida and Georgia in the East, while Bama got Tennessee and Vanderbilt. And so it just became the schedules were not equal. On top of that, we've gone over a decade with schools not going to other campuses. I mean, I remember when LSU went to Kentucky a couple of years ago, it was the first time they had been there in over a decade. I believe Georgia has still never been to College Station to play Texas A&M.
That's insanity. That's absolute insanity.
So what they're doing, the proposal, and they proposed it a year ago with Texas and Oklahoma coming in, is going to 16 teams. What you can do is, and this is all mathematics, you go to 9 games conference schedule. You make 3 permanent, rivalry opponents. We did away with East versus West, so there's no divisions. Everybody, you play 3 teams, the same 3 teams every year, and the other 6 rotate. You play this 6 this year, you play the next 6 the next year. And then once every 4 years, you will go to everybody's opposing campus. I think it's a great move. I think it makes more, equals things out more across the SEC. Yeah, there'll be some years where you get easier draws than others, but you look at the SEC schedule that they made for this year. I was just talking with a buddy of mine who is a big Texas fan. It's like, Texas has to play Georgia, but they don't get Alabama or LSU. A&M this year doesn't play Alabama. It's a weird schedule where, not everybody's playing everybody. And I get it. When you go to 16 teams, it's not going to be equal. But the best thing you could do is try to make it as cyclical as possible, that you're rotating, you're playing different teams. At least you're going at least once every 2 years playing everybody.
I wish that college football would remain college football and adapt just a couple of tiny elements from the NFL, because I am not a proponent of making it feel like NFL light or NFL adjacent. But from a scheduling standpoint, Alabama and Georgia should play every year. And you should have other protected rivalries as well. Georgia, Florida, for instance. I think that those sorts of games create interest that go just beyond the conference. And I just look at what, the SEC has done with scheduling. And to your point, there have been some years where because they get stuck, and every conference is like this, I think for simplicity matters. It's, you played this team, now you play that team, now you play this team. Like, when we're going into the 12-team era, if you've got a 9-game schedule in the SEC, which along with the Big Ten is one of the top 2 conferences in college football by quite a bit, shouldn't they be able to give us the best teams playing each other every single year, at least at a high clip? It doesn't necessarily mean every team is going to have room on its schedule and everyone shouldn't, have this ridiculously loaded conference slate or anything like that. But I just look at Alabama, Georgia specifically. And as someone who is not from that SEC sort of footprint, I say, man, how are you not putting these guys against each other every single year? That's a big game. That's a big television audience. Everyone's going to be interested in that because it'd be an awesome game to watch. And I think it makes a better product for fans.
Well, the problem with that is, yes, you're talking about those 2 programs because they've been the best in recent years. But for a while, Georgia went through some lean years where they were losing 3-4 games on the regular in the later years of Mark Richt and then Kirby Smart taking over. So Georgia's become a dominant force. I don't know about Alabama. I mean, they could take a big step backward with the Nick Saban era ending. So we'll see. But rivalries need to be protected, and that's what the SEC will look at first. First and foremost is the Iron Bowl. Auburn's got to play Alabama every year no matter what. The other big rivalry is Alabama and Tennessee. That one has to be protected at all costs. Everybody loves that one. Auburn's got to play Georgia. That's an old one that dates back 100 years. That needs to be protected.
But even the Alabama-Tennessee part of it that you mentioned is what I'm talking about with Bama and Georgia. Those brands are so big and massive now that much like Alabama-Tennessee, Tennessee, as you described it, had a long period of suck. They weren't relevant. They were fighting just to be in the top 25 all the time. They've elevated since then, but still Alabama played Tennessee every year. Why? Big brands, big TV draws. And that's how you're going to get people to watch your games, which I feel like is the point of making a conference schedule.
What's amazing about it, though, is I asked some of my Tennessee friends, I said, well, guys, don't you want Bama off the schedule? Like, you get your brains beat in by them every year. And they said, no, it's a rivalry. This thing dates back to my grandpa and my great-grandpa. And, we have to keep playing this. And so it's just college football, it's weird sometimes. History and tradition, people want to protect that first and foremost. Now, the interesting thing will be here, Spencer, on the flip side, the people who are opposed to the SEC going to 9-game schedules are those middle-tier SEC teams like the South Carolinas, the Kentuckys. Mark Stoops and Shane Beamer, they look at it as my 4 non-conference games. I schedule 4 cupcakes. I get easy wins there. Then all I need to do is win 2 SEC games. That gets me to 6-6. I get to a bowl game, and I save my job. Those are the guys who don't want to go to a 9-game conference schedule because then you're talking about, and keep in mind, they both play a rivalry game in a non-conference. South Carolina plays Clemson every year. Kentucky plays Louisville every year. Mark Stoops is looking at it and going, wait, I got to play Louisville. That's a tough game. And my 3 other non-conference games, I'm going to lose one of those. So then I'm only going to get 2 cupcakes. And then I've got 9 SEC games, and I'm going to have to basically win 4 of those to guarantee myself getting to a bowl game. And so those are the coaches that voted this thing down last time around. I'll be curious to see if those athletic directors and coaches have changed their minds this time around.
Yeah, just so everyone is on the same page here, this has not been confirmed in the SEC, but it is reported to be advancing discussions, shall we say. It is moving along. I think it would be a really, really good move on multiple fronts. Doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be bigger changes in the conference, but still, within the context of the SEC, could be a big, big shift. Chris Gordy, Locked On SEC, Monday through Friday on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Chris, thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, Spencer.
The coaching carousel is still going on. Hard to believe, isn't it? Well, we're talking about that next. Did you know that FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook? I did, and now you do as well. You can get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel at America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Plus, you got college football over-unders, you got Heisman odds, national championship odds, everything that you need for this wonderful, beautiful sport is over there to get your juices pumping here in February, in addition to listening to or watching this show, which I appreciate you doing. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. The coaching carousel knows no bounds. It has no calendar. It has no agenda. It just does things like a dog chasing cars, according to the Joker circa the Dark Knight 2008, R.I.P. Heath Ledger. So I'm joined by David Schultz, host of Locked On Sunbelt here on Locked On College Football, because Georgia State's head coach has departed to be the tight ends coach at South Carolina. Yeah, you heard that correctly. Not an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator or associate head coach. No, the tight ends coach from Georgia State all the way to South Carolina. Here's the crazy thing, David. Spring practice just got started. What's going on here?
It's insane. So this may be, thanks for having me, Spencer. This may be a special case. He was the offensive line coach at South Carolina, and his family stayed behind. His family lives in Columbia. So he was going back and forth on a somewhat irregular basis while he was the coach at Georgia State. So a lot like maybe Kane Womack in Alabama, going because it was Kalen DeBoer, and maybe if a Mike Norvell gets a job, he wouldn't have taken it. Nothing against Mike, but he knows Kalen. And so in this case, if it's Clemson with the tight ends coaching job, maybe he's not going back to South Carolina because it's in Clemson instead of Columbia. But no, it's insane. Literally, finally, Georgia State reached back out to me to have him on the show, and we were all set to have him on sometime next week. And lo and behold, we woke up this morning to the news that he's going to South Carolina. As you said, not as a coordinator, but as a position coach. That is, I mean, if Chip Kelly to Ohio State wasn't insane enough as it already is, this is even crazier. But as my buddy Craig Stevenson said from AL.com, more money, less responsibility. We could all hope for those jobs.
Well, certainly from that angle, it makes more sense. It's still borderline insanity just from a sport health standpoint to see these sorts of moves in the same offseason, after a year in which last year, I think the offseason topics surrounding college football, they were about realignment. They were about NIL being legalized. They're about the transfer portal and all those changes coming about. I think this is the chickens coming home to roost in the coaching standpoint, because coaches are losing leverage. They are not able to do as much actual coaching. And so in the same year, we've seen a Big Ten coach leave one job for a Big Ten offensive coordinator job. We've seen an ACC head coach leave to be a coordinator in the NFL. Now we're seeing a head coach go to be a position coach in the SEC from the Sun Belt, which is probably the number 3 Group of 5 conference in all of college football. I think you'd have the Mountain West and the American above it, though you may feel differently along those lines.
The Sun Belt will tell you difference.
The Sun Belt might tell me differently. Feel free to tell me off in the comments there. But I mean, my point is that the Sun Belt is a good, respectable league. We have seen coaches go from the Sun Belt to bigger jobs, to become more. I mean, you look at Louisiana's in the Sun Belt, right? Or am I just completely off? You had Billy Napier go from Louisiana to Florida. This is a conference that people recognize, that they watch, that's a good place to be as a head coach. And he said, I'd rather be a tight ends coach. Is this all family driven, or is it more along the lines of, no, this is another move that is an indictment of the current state of the sport?
Well, there's a couple things going on here. All right, so the more money and less responsibility is a nice joke, but that could be the case as well. So let's go back to South Alabama and Kane Womack, for example. He's a Mississippi kid, and he was not in line for that Mississippi State job. Jeff Lebby got it. Jeff Lebby has exactly 0 head coaching experience, none, nada, not at any level. Kane Womack had 3 years at South Alabama, and I
good years
for that job, and he did a pretty good job. They won their first bowl game, had a 10-win season. This year wasn't quite as good as some of us may have hoped it would have been. But I think he thinks it's easier to get a Power 5 gig from the defensive coordinator position at Alabama. So that's I don't necessarily think that's a step back. It's a different pathway to go. In terms of the overall thing, what you're talking about, and I've been looking at this over the last week or so, the money is insane. So Georgia State turns out that, based on the USA Today report, they have the largest amount of revenue in the Sun Belt. That's $46 million. The SEC gets over $51 million from the SEC network.
Just in media rights.
Just in the SEC network rights. That's right, and that's going to go up here in short order. So the budget hate came out, and so Alabama of all schools, and this is obviously with Nick Saban involved, the previous year spent $37 million on their coaches. Every single coach, everyone, not just football, all their coaches was $37 million, and so they got $14 million left over. Mississippi State, like $22 million. So that's almost $30 million difference. And so South Carolina, can, if he's making $500,000-$600,000 in Atlanta, well, we got an extra, $50 million. We can up it if we want to bring our guy home. So the money is a thing. And I'm with you. I'm all for the NIL. I'm all for the transfer portal. But this is something that I did not see. And someone's going to have to fix it. All right. I don't know if it's going to be Greg Sankey and the Big Ten commissioner. But those guys,
Tony Petitti, yeah.
Yeah, because you just can't have, as if it's not already 24/7, 365, right? I mean, the pro coaches, think what the pro coaches have been doing, other than maybe getting a new job, since the end of college season, if they played they were recruiting in December, maybe played a bowl game. Almost everyone plays in a bowl game. Or I'm sorry, since the end of the pro season and the new year, they've been basically on vacation. Right? They're going over film of their own guys who are going to be free agents, but they're working a regular 8 to 10 hour job with some time down. Free agency doesn't start for like another month, and then they get the draft. And so that'll pick up now with the Super Bowl. So, and these guys, meanwhile, as we mentioned, you went from, regular season to maybe a bowl championship game to a conference championship game to a bowl game to recruiting. And for the Sun Belt, that's all in like the same couple of weeks. And same with the other Group of 5 conferences. And then you get the new year and, the transfer portal, the kids who left. And then, if you have to hire a coach, you got to do that. And then you got the other signing day and the portal's going to open up again. It never ends. It is never ending. And you can't really build a program anymore. I mean, we have a great example in the Sun Belt. Texas State was a mess a couple of weeks ago. TJ Finley coming back. Then they went out and got Jaden DeLaura, and he had his off-the-field issues. And then TJ Finley was leaving, and then Jaden DeLaura left. It is, not even having a quarterback for 1 year. And so it's really difficult to, build a program where you can see, all right, we'll see what Arkansas State does. They got a freshman quarterback. See if he stays there for 3 years or 4 years, right? Because, some Belt quarterbacks aren't going pro, or is he going to get a big money deal going to the SEC team? So we'll see if that happens. But it's really tough. It is really tough to build a program these days, and it has to do with a lot of money.
I don't think it's a coincidence that all these coaches are saying, I don't need to be a head coach. I want to actually, coach football rather than having all these other responsibilities. Last thing I want to talk about with you, David, is what fans who are not affiliated with Georgia State, however many out there maybe listening or watching right now might want to know is, what does a short list of candidates look like? Because like you said, spring practice has already started. That feels ripe for a promotion from within, or do you think there could be an outside hire and try and grab somebody's coordinator? Because apparently coaches can move at any point in time.
Well, I would think, and they did postpone or delayed spring practice, right? A lot of spring practice starts in March and the spring game is in April, but they started on Tuesday and we're going to be done in a month. They were going to be done before a lot of these schools actually started spring practice, so they can delay that for a little bit. It's going to be tough because the portal is going to open again, and now it gets to be open for these players if they're going to leave. They already lost a commit, but that's like 2025. I would think they're going to hire from within, but my sources, if you will, other people who actually cover Georgia State in Atlanta say they have some candidates from outside of the program. That is a tough deal because, again, going back to getting that job somewhere around Christmas, right? You gotta move you're out recruiting. You might have to move your family. And now, instead of having that all settled in the new year, and while spring practice is getting underway, now it's not. Now you're not. Now that new coach and coaching staff isn't going to be settled until after spring practice, even if they're hired. Again, there'll always be people who want it because they're going to be making more money than they were before, most likely. But we'll see. So it is fascinating, this whole thing about money. Actually, yesterday, my topic was going to be about that money for the SEC was getting and how can the Sun Belt compete. And then all of a sudden, the Sun Belt head coach goes for position coach, as you said, not as a coordinator, but as a position coach. Again, maybe specifically, this one's a little bit different than what we may find otherwise. But my goodness, I did not see this coming at all. And, for athletic directors and presidents of schools, their heads have to be spinning just to make sure their guys are coming back. I joked about Kane Womack, how much could a defensive coordinator at Alabama pay compared to being head coach at South
And he's a
Alabama?
co-DC there with Buffalo's former head coach.
Right. And then, and the longer that went, and then they had the guy on the staff and off the staff and at Georgia and coming back, whatever. And, the longer that went, the more it was looking like Kane Womack was going to get it, and he took the gig. So it has been fascinating to watch this. And even that was late, right? That's in the middle of January when he took the job. And that was late because Nick Saban, waited until after the national championship a couple of days later to announce his retirement. And so it hasn't stopped. The dominoes continue to fall. People are saying that they wouldn't be surprised if a high school coach got it. That's a tough leap to go from high school.
That's a massive leap.
I would say if you want someone who's tied into all of the Georgia recruits, then it is a tough leap. You're right, but maybe Georgia Tech's got somebody. Georgia's got somebody who wants to be a head coach. I do know Kane Womack had a shot at being a DC before he took the South Alabama job, and I think he was the youngest head coach in America for a few years. But he said at the time, if it was all about the money, he would have become an SEC DC. And so maybe, someone takes a step back in this case to get head coaching experience under the belt.
Today's episode of Locked On College Football is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. Right now, all users get $100 off when you buy a big game ticket with code VEGAS100. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They've got everything you need, and they're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event, and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Right now, all Gametime users get $100 off a big game ticket with code VEGAS100. Terms apply. Just download the Gametime app, use code VEGAS100 for $100 off a big game ticket, or if you're not going to the game, use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Is Penn State bound to have another double-digit win season in 2024? James Franklin is still the head coach, and, well, that's often been the case. Zach Sako joining me here on Locked On College Football, host of Locked On Nittany Lions over there for Penn State. And let's hop right into it, Zach. 9.5, the win total for Penn State. Do you like that over or under with their schedule, which is, I won't say terrible, but it's far from a cakewalk?
I would say it's a gauntlet, the schedule. So do I like the win total? It is airtight. I've been kind of staring at that number since it was released just about it's been a week now, I guess, or maybe close to 5 days for the Big Ten Conference. And 9.5, that's what it was a season before. And I think Vegas is spot on with this. This is a Penn State team that is above the top half of the rest of the Big Ten Conference. It's Ohio State, it's Oregon, and then it's Penn State, not too far behind, but they're trailing. They're trailing those two schools. They don't play Oregon. They play Ohio State at Beaver Stadium, but this is a schedule it's very tough, and it's probably one of the toughest in recent memories. I mean, you're facing USC. I know UCLA's gone through some changes, but you're facing 3 out of the new 4 schools from the Pac-12, and the Pac-12 is sending their best. They didn't send Washington State. They didn't send Oregon State. They didn't send Cal. They sent the 4 best schools.
Hey, now, let's not be hating on the Pac-2. I can't sit here and stand for that sort of slander, but you're right. They didn't send Cal and Stanford. Yeah. I'll live with that.
So at Washington, I know they're going through some changes as well, but Jedd Fisch, look what he did with the turnaround at Arizona. And he's able to get, retain a good quarterback in Will Rogers out of the transfer portal. So Penn State's going to be challenged. I think they're better than Washington. I know they're better than UCLA at this point, but Ohio State got that much better. But I also look at the way the schedule unfolds. Yeah, they play West Virginia. I think that's a win, even though that's a road game. But it's going to the West Coast that's going to pose a challenge, because I want to kind of factor almost they can only have one mulligan in this case with 9.5 wins, Spencer. That when they go out to USC, Southern Cal in the middle of the season, and then they have a bye week, that's nice and all, but then you got to go back on the road to Wisconsin, to Camp Randall, and I think Wisconsin's going to be better. So this schedule is very unforgiving. If Penn State drops one of those 2 games on the road at USC or at Wisconsin, I wouldn't be surprised. I'm also picking Ohio State at this point in time because of what they've done with the coaching staff and the transfer portal. So Penn State's in line for a 10-2 season once again, maybe an 11-1 season, because they are better than all those other teams. But the way the schedule unfolds for them, there is a chance that they could lose in one of those tougher road environments. So I'm thinking 10-2, which is over that 9.5, maybe even an 11-1 with just that lone loss to Ohio State.
I think that schedule is tough. Missing Oregon is huge. Getting Washington instead, because the Huskies are going to, I think, have a better season than it felt like they were going to about a month ago, when it was just everyone and everything was leaving. But Washington has done some work in the transfer portal. They'll have Will Rogers at quarterback. Jedd Fisch is a good coach. Jedd Fisch is a good play caller. So I don't think they'll be a conference contender, but they can be in the middle, closer to the top than the bottom. But I think they are firmly in the middle there. I like what you brought up about Wisconsin, because going to Camp Randall, never easy. Just not going to be. Luke Fickell's going into another year in Madison in which I feel good about what he is building there and what they are capable of doing, what he can do as a head coach.
Yep.
Maybe it's because I'm a West Coast kind of guy, but I'm very high on USC, and I think USC fans will tell you I'm not exactly what you would describe as a USC homer, but I think their offseason moves have been good. That's a long trip. I mean, when there was
in the middle of the season, you don't have a month to prepare for that hype of that Rose Bowl that they've done in the past.
Right. And so that, I think, is at least advantageous. The players and coaches and everyone are familiar with going all the way over, but it hasn't been in the middle of the season. And I think that is one of the premier trips that we're going to see a team make this year. Is you're going to have Penn State play USC. I think both teams will be ranked around the time that happens. Penn State's schedule early, I like that you brought that up too, because their schedule early, I think, is really favorable. You got the West Virginia game first. That's a winnable game. That is absolutely winnable game. Then you go 4 straight at home, including your first 2 Big Ten games. I expect Penn State to be 5-0 there. But then in the middle, the Ohio State, at Wisconsin, at USC. Boy, that stuff can get dicey. But let's talk about the team Penn State will be putting on the field. Drew Aller back at quarterback. James Franklin back at head coach. Correct me if I'm wrong. A new offensive coordinator has moved his way into the building. New defensive coordinator with Manny Diaz going to take the head coaching job at Duke. How do you feel about Penn State's offseason as it pertains to 2024? Because if they go 10-2 again, that's probably a college football playoff spot.
Yeah, that is a college football playoff spot, assuming that they lose to, Ohio State's going to be in the top 3, most likely. And that game's at Beaver Stadium. So do I lean Ohio State in that game? Yes, but it's not saying that Penn State couldn't win and surprise the Buckeyes, who will most likely be favored. As far as the offseason moves go, Penn State got its number 1 choices if they were going to have to make any replacements. They fired Mike Yurcich. They put their nose to the ground and they started doing investigative work to say, hey, who are we going to bring in? And Penn State finally has, James Franklin talks about alignment. I don't know how many people out of the Penn State stratosphere hear what James Franklin has to say about alignment, but the president, the board of trustees, the athletic department, all on board with what his vision is for Penn State football and the program. And they got their number 1 target in Andy Kotelnicki, for the offensive coordinator spot. They were able to outbid other schools because Penn State wasn't the only one that wanted Kotelnicki to take over as the OC. Oklahoma was another one of them. And then Tom Allen, who is a former head coach. James Franklin talks about how valuable it is to have a head coach at these coordinator spots. And that's exactly what they were. And special teams, they got Justin Lustig. So they have 3 new coaches at all 3 major coordinator spots. It is crazy to think that Penn State was a top 10 team, loses all 3 of those major coaches, and might have been able to upgrade 2 out of 3 of them. And that's no disrespect to Stacey Collins. We know Mike Yurcich didn't work out in Happy Valley, but this time around, Penn State was able to go get their priority targets and bring them to Happy Valley. And that's a testament to the athletic director in Pat Kraft. I like what they've done in the transfer portal. They've addressed needs. Have they done exactly enough? I'd like to see more at wide receiver, offensive line as well, but you got something. Something is better than nothing. And I think you just needed veteran experience at the end of the day. Talent's important, but you just needed guys that can come in and almost act at, immediate bridges to leadership. And Julian Fleming does just that. On top of, he's a really good run blocker, and Penn State's run game wasn't that great, and that'll help take pressure off of Drew Aller.
Yeah, I think having Fleming in there to help unlock the downfield passing game is huge for the Nittany Lions offensively. And with a new staff, that's certainly something that I'll be looking for early in the year. And they've got to have it loaded and ready to go week 1, because going to Morgantown is going to be no joke. That's that's a bowl team and then some last year under Neil Brown for the Mountaineers. Zach Sako, the host of Locked On Nittany Lions, here on Locked On College Football. Zach, thanks so much for joining me.
I'm glad to join anytime you need me, Spencer.
Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a great weekend. And until next time, have a wonderful rest of your day.